Welcome to the Podunk Polymath, a podcast dedicated to the sentiments of a secular, sarcastic, screwed-up Southern SJW and skeptic. I'm your host, Chris. Come on in. Welcome to another thrilling episode of the Podunk Polymath podcast. I'm your host, Chris. I can't get Google Hangouts to work, so we're going straight to video, straight to podcast, and I meant is either the Hangouts sucks or I suck, Peter sucks. All these things are possible. So anyway, this week I have on with me, I'm trying to get on 3 times, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let this pass again, so I'm just doing it this way. Of course, he is the co-host of Philosophers in Space and Embrace the Void, and an all-around long-suffering guy for even agreeing to come on here. If you'll join me in welcoming Aaron Rabinowitz. How's it going, Aaron?
Doing all right. Sorry that the technology has been demon-filled.
So, first of all, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I am, I guess, a lifelong atheist, but I'm a educator I teach over at Rutgers, New Brunswick, in the philosophy department. I teach primarily a lot of ethics and sometimes specifically things like AI ethics and personhood. And you know, I really focus on being an educator, and that, like, for me, it's about taking a lot of good work that's being done by researchers and philosophers out there in the world, or has already been done, and making it more accessible to people who will benefit from it, but may not have the time or the training to read a lot of primary texts.
So just tell us a little bit about your background in ethics, since that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interested in a weird way, I was sort of into this stuff long before I knew that there was any sort of technical form to it. When I was younger, I was very interested in issues about justice, probably in an annoying kind of way, like in a, shut up kind of way. But when I got to undergrad, I discovered that this was something that people still do professionally, and I got really interested in it, and my background is in philosophy speak would be described as like analytic ethics. So it's a lot of trying to understand the different foundational theories within ethics and their different problems, and the alternatives and the problems with the alternatives, and a lot of what I focus on right now is problems having to do with what's called moral luck, which are situations where you are held morally responsible for things that are beyond your control, which is a substantial problem, I think. And then I'm also very interested in AI and emerging ethical questions with new technology, since we as a culture are rapidly changing and expanding as this technology gives us more potential, but it also creates sort of substantial new risks for unethical behavior.
Okay, so, of course, ethics is a branch of philosophy, I guess you could say. So, I mean, I asked you this before. What is philosophy? What's kind of a thumbnail sketch, would you say?
Right, so the standard answer is philosophy means love of wisdom. I think anyone who's spent a lot of time around philosophers would say that philosophy means love of questions, and maybe not always love so much of answers. But the reality, I think, is philosophy is about trying to understand everything, and like that includes understanding what we mean by understanding and what we mean by everything, that it's a very sort of broad framework of asking hard, often conceptual questions, often abstract questions, that are in turn the foundational questions that underlie a lot of other applied fields that are very important for human beings. So I think you can get a philosophy of science, you can get a philosophy of math, and a philosophy of law. And in one sense, you could say that all of these are branches of philosophy, like you were saying with ethics. There are lots of different ways that you can sort of divide up the world of philosophy. Yeah, I think that's the best way I would say to answer the question. Like, you define concepts, you understand distinctions, you raise hard questions that may not have any answers, or may have only sort of flawed answers a lot of the time. And you teach people to argue better. You teach people to think more critically about their arguments, about their evidence, to get better at presenting hypothetical objections or counterexamples. All of that kind of stuff all falls under the domain of philosophy these days.
Okay, so that's kind of a general definition. Okay, so ethics. What the fuck exactly? I mean, let's.
Yeah.
I'm a layman. I'm just some dude, right? And you come up to me with ethics. I mean, I know what I hear. Kind of a base, I guess, a layman's definition. Like you should like right and wrong and shit like that. I mean, what's kind of the deeper, I guess, meaning or whatever.
Well, and this again, so now we've hit the, the first of many moments where like everything I say here, there's a philosopher out there who will disagree, who will write a book to the contrary. So like even trying to define philosophy the way I did, someone might quibble with certain parts of that certainly, but like especially when we start to define ethics, there's a lot of debate amongst ethicists and philosophers what ethics actually is. It's a little bit of a weird branch of philosophy in some ways. It's sort of a bastard. It's sort of the bastard of philosophy, or was for a while, and I think still is in some sense, because it's not quite as always as perfectly rigorous as logic, and it's not always as clear what the subject matter is, and a lot of psychology often gets mixed into it. But so all those caveats in place, I will say, ethics to me is the study of how to live and act well, which can include a lot of different things. It includes, I think, what you were describing as the idea of like right and wrong, moral obligation, and what is morally impermissible are important questions within ethics. And I use the words ethics and morality or moral interchangeably. Some people don't, but I think there's not an important distinction between those two, and it's just a matter of ease of usage to use multiple terminologies at this point. But like also I think, what it means overall to lead a good life, which may not just boil down to always doing what you are morally obligated to do, is also a part of ethics that I think we ought to try to promote human flourishing, and that comes in the form of engaging in valuable projects of worth in your life, which may not necessarily maximize overall well-being or something like that, as you could in other ways if you were willing to force people to engage in ethical behavior literally all the time, for example. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, that explains it. What are some examples like today? Like if I were just, I don't know, what are some good examples that you would cite as far as where you could use ethics and kind of the branches it would take?
Yeah, I think part of me is sympathetic to the idea that ethics is at every level and every moment of your life, that in every action that you are engaging in, there could be an ethical dimension to it. I don't think you necessarily always have to be fixated only on that dimension, but for example, when you go to the store and you're making decisions between item A and item B, there could be a lot of important ethical factors that go into what you decide that could range from, how far away did this item travel from, who was it made by, what's it made of, is there a more ethical alternative available to me at a reasonable price? Like all of those things are things that we all, I think, sort of intuitively are weighing a lot of the time when we're going around engaging with our behavior, with others. Like I think ethics is something that, in a sense, we're all hardwired by culture to be doing all of the time. We don't always put it explicitly in those terms, but we certainly put it in those terms when we think of it in like big context scenarios, like should I take this job or this other job? Should I consider going back to school? Should I, end this long-term relationship? Like often these things have very important ethical dimensions. Or, within my career, should I take this form of advancement even though it comes with some uncomfortable ethical strings that I'm not a huge fan of. I think we're all getting into this stuff constantly.
Okay. So every decision, well, not every. I mean, I guess every decision you make could be considered kind of an ethical branch, right? So you could either make this. I guess it just wouldn't have to be just two. Obviously, life's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, and often ethics is hard because there's more than two options, and you're weighing them on a sort of more than two spectrums. So you can't just get a like either or easy decision between something that's clearly better and something that's clearly worse. You have to kind of decide between a mix of often imperfect balances between things like autonomy and well-being, respect for rights, and so it gets very challenging, and that's why some people I think go so far as to argue that the reason it's so challenging is because it's not actually a theory about anything real. It's really something that we've made up, that we invented it for the sake of social stability, but that it's not actually attached to anything out there in reality. And so everyone has all these differing intuitions about ethics. And of course they do, because it's all just evolved habit, basically.
So what do you think? I mean, obviously, as an atheist, or you can't assume there's an absolute, like there's not a God, or supreme being kind of dictating what absolute right and absolute wrong is.
Yeah, well, so I'm a moral realist. You're right. I'm an atheist, and so I don't believe that God can provide a morality for us. I am also a moral realist, though, and I think that there are objective moral truths that exist, in a sense, out there in the world, and that it is our obligation to try to understand those moral truths and to act properly based on them.
Okay. So I mean, how do you determine that, though? These moral truths.
Yeah, and you try to reach them. There's a mix of ways that, like, and this is a hard problem for moral realists like myself. One answer that's been commonly classically given is there's some sense of intuition, right? Some moral sense by which we intuit or perceive these moral truths, but that gets a little weird. What I think is, we understand moral truths in a similar kind of way to how we end up understanding mathematical truths, but not entirely, in the sense that we get to them through a mix of reasoning, empathy, sort of well, how would you call it? Debate, discourse, all these kinds of methods by which we have refined our understanding of other abstract entities that you don't perceive out there in reality, but which you can talk about in more or less consistent ways. And I think ultimately it makes the most sense to say that the truths that we are talking about in morality are discovered and not merely invented, that they would be true even if no society in human history ever managed to come to understand them.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard there's some sort of evolutionary basis based on the fact that, we want to, survival of our species dictates that we don't go around killing each other off, because otherwise a species would, be gone. So therefore there has to be some sort of morality of some sort so they don't run around killing each other all the time.
Yeah, and this is the biggest challenge I think that the moral realists face at this point, is this evolutionary debunking argument. This was popularized by Sharon Street, I think is the name. I get paranoid when I start quoting direct names from modern people. But yes, she wrote a very important paper that was basically like, I can make a case that we would evolve moral sense, quote unquote, this moral intuition, whether or not there was any objective moral truths out there. And since moral truths seem like kind of weird things, and like perceiving them seems kind of weird, and there's no clear explanation for how that works as compared to a fairly functional explanation for why we evolved pro-social behaviors, it seems more reasonable, she argues, more parsimonious, that that morality isn't real, that it is just this invented evolutionary adaptation. Because it would be adaptive to believe these things even if they weren't true. Do you know what I mean? That's a difference between moral truths and perceptual truths, for example, right? It's not useful to you, for the most part, to perceive things that aren't there in reality. That would be not an adaptive evolutionary behavior, but perceiving the idea that you should be nice to me if I'm nice to you is an adaptive behavior, even if there's no fact of the matter out there about how you and I should actually act towards each other.
Complete bullshit then.
Well, that would be, I mean, it's not necessarily like bullshit. It's more like it's a constructed tool rather than a discovered set of truths. Like, there can still be better and worse moralities on that view based on what the view leads you to do in terms of your behavior, in terms of being able to achieve your goals. Some ethics are more likely to allow individuals to achieve their goals, I think, even if I were to concede that morality isn't true. But I just think that that's ultimately just the wrong way to look at it. That, like, if I say, for example, you ought not to molest small children, like, that's an objective truth. It's true in the same way that the speed of light is true, in the sense that you could never prove that it was false. And even if everyone were to come together and vote that, like, molesting small children was moral, that vote would in no way impact the morality of that behavior. And, like, I can explain why molesting small children is immoral, right? If somebody asks me, well, what's your evidence? I can say, look at what it does to the small children. They're miserable. They are scarred for life. It's horribly damaging. It deprives them of autonomy. They can't consent. Like, I can tell you 5 different ethical ways of explaining why it's wrong. And none of them are going to be sufficient that, like, some seriously amoral person can't say, well, I don't care about any of those things, right? It's not going to, like, physically force their hand into not doing it. But I think you can make as good a case for the objective truth of that particular claim as you really can for any other objective truths that are out there.
In today's world, do you think ethics are more or less important than, I don't know, it just seems like people seem to kind of throw it to the side and just kind of do what the fuck they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm always hesitant to say, like, is today versus times in the history that I didn't live. Like, I would say ethics is always incredibly important because human beings are always suffering, and you always need to, like, be trying to ameliorate that suffering and improve their quality of life. I certainly think that ethics is incredibly important right now because, like you say, there's a bit of a crisis of belief with regard to ethics, it seems like, and the different sort of solutions that people have provided that are sort of alternatives to ethics are not really great. And so I think there does need to be a return to discussion of ethics, but in a way that isn't like a return to, like, church style ethics, in a sense that, like, it's good that we've moved away from the classic model of the church handing down our ethics for all of us. And that we've gotten into, we've moved through the postmodern phase of, like, are there really any objective ethical truths, or is all of this just, systems of control by people in authority to limit the power of other individuals? And I think hopefully now we can reach a phase where dialogue and pluralism can sort of bring about the thing that I think a lot of us really want, which is a society where within tolerable limits, people live different kinds of varying lifestyles. And, I might think some other person's lifestyle is not exactly the correct balance of virtues, and they might think the same about mine. But as long as none of us are molesting children, for example, like, we can all coexist relatively well. So I think that we need to be moving in that direction, but that involves a very sophisticated discussion about ethics. And, like, a lot of people never got any training in that formally, right? If you're not getting it from the church, and you haven't taken an intro to ethics course that happened to be taught by someone who cared enough to, like, teach it properly, like, you likely have very little terminology for which to weigh these really complicated ethical questions.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. The fact that there seems to be so little, well, education in this country generally, I would think, I would say, but also ethics and related fields seems to be kind of something we give short shrift to. I think because people don't consider it a hard science and it's just kind of, abstract or something. I mean, I took it in college. I took an intro course and wrote some papers, but I don't really recall that much. I mean, it wasn't that big. It was like a 101 class. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, why? First of all, why do you think we give such short shrift to ethics as a discipline? And also, what can people? What would you tell people who would say, well, that doesn't really have a place in my life. I'm not like sitting there thinking all the time. It's not making me any money. It's not getting me ahead in life. Why should I care?
Yeah. So I think the second question is much harder. The first question is my intuition, my sense about it is, like I said, historically, most of ethics has come from the church. Not, like the church stole ethics from philosophy, obviously, like Socrates and Plato and stuff are the precursors to what we think of as Christian virtue and Christian ethics. But for the most part, people saw it as coming from there historically. So recently, when you've had the separation of church and state, I think what happened was there was a lot of feeling that ethics shouldn't be taught in schools if it's not going to be taught in a explicitly religious kind of way. It should just be left up to the parents and the religions to teach it or not as they see fit. That's just sort of my sense of it. I feel like, I mean, obviously I think ethics should be taught from a very early age in public schools in a way that would be, I think, incredibly beneficial to everyone involved. But I do think you would see a lot of pushback of fear that public schools were indoctrinating individuals into atheist ethics or secular ethics or some sort of competition for religious ethics. And I think part of the reason that you'll see this much pushback is because as religion has had to cede ground over and over again on the empirical questions in the world, they have clung more tightly to being the dominant voice on ethical questions. And so I think that's a part of their market share that they're very defensive about at this particular point. And I mean, I should also point out, I do think that religions can provide some ethics. I think they're not the ideal way to acquire ethics, but I think there can be ethical individuals who are also religious, and that I often would prefer an ethically religious individual to a non-ethically secular individual. Yeah, but I think... Sorry, did I get around to the question on that one?
No, yeah.
That's just how I see historically why this split has occurred and persisted within our culture, why you're more likely to see an epistemology class in a high school before you're going to see... But, like, it's changing some. I think in a lot of the... I see in a couple of private schools and places, people teaching, like, ethics courses for their students that have to do with social justice and things. Places where you see folks more interested in social justice, you do see, I think, more of a push for this kind of ethical education. And so, I'm sorry, I realized I didn't answer your second harder question, which was, how do you convince people to be ethical? And that's one of the eternal difficulties with that ethics basically faces. I think you get there primarily via empathy. You have to make them care about the well-being of other individuals. There's a great Nagel quote where he basically says there's no functional substitute for genuinely caring about the well-being of others. And if you have an individual who's like a sociopath, for example, who just genuinely can't care about the well-being of others, you are unlikely to be able to get them to understand and care about a variety of ethical distinctions, I think. And if you have someone like the Joker, right, who just would rather watch the world burn, there's probably no way to motivate them to act ethically. The best you can do is stop them from acting unethically.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to kind of you made an interesting point towards the end of the other comment you made about ethically religious versus like unethically atheist or whatever. Because I have run across that particular conundrum on several occasions, but here recently it's entered my kind of my realm of attention because I've seen people who are nominally atheists being just complete dicks because somebody didn't meet their personal worldview, and because they were religious, therefore they are automatically devoid of any I guess ethics they would consider valid, and that really pisses me off because I feel like that gives. I mean, of course, atheists TM aren't one tribe or anything. They're different sects. I guess sex is a bad word, but different offshoots or whatever. But I feel like that's an important distinction that should be made between atheists seem to sometimes think they're kind of above the fray, and somehow because they're not religious, they are therefore ethically more superior or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff going on there, and it does relate to part of the some one of the questions you asked earlier about why is ethics sort of this weird secondary child within philosophy. During the Enlightenment period, so like late 1800s into the 1900s, you get a lot of moves to try to rationalize, to be very hyper rational in a lot of our philosophical work, in keeping with the sort of scientific revolution that's happening during that time. We're trying to be very formalized, and in that world, ethics, I think, was viewed as not formal enough, as not real enough in the ways that I've been talking about a little bit, and so it gets kind of shoved to the side, and that, I think, trickled down to the descendants of those movements, which are the sort of secular atheist communities, where today you see a lot of emphasis on rationality over feelings, and a lot of sort of somewhat naive views about reason's ability to overcome personal biases, and reason's ability by itself to provide sufficient sort of ethical frameworks for which to live. Kant tried really hard, Immanuel Kant tried really hard to give a purely rationalist account of ethics, and I don't think it necessarily worked, but it was certainly a more rigorous attempt than a lot of what you see in the more like libertarian, randist kind of pure rationality ethics that I think has had more of a success within the secular community sometimes.
As far as the rationality, this kind of uber rationality being end all be, yeah, the end all be all. If you are not rational, your point's invalid somehow, and that has really been something that has driven me up the wall as of late.
So yeah, so it comes from a good place in the sense that being reasonable is important, thinking through things, being consistent, all of this logic stuff is incredibly important. But it is not, I think, the total sum of knowledge. That there are important things to understand that are not necessarily based purely in logic and reason, and that reason is not a perfect cure for individuals' blind spots. That like individuals still possess substantial blind spots, no matter how quote unquote rational they are. And that like a good life is not a purely rational life a lot of the time, I think. And depending on how you define rationality, but like, we're not all going around, weighing out what is the purely rational choice in every given situation. And I don't think that we necessarily have to. I think that we can sort of play loose sometimes, and that can be a pleasant way to live. So yeah, I think we want to be careful about understanding that rationality is a tool, but it's not the only tool. And that's why I keep emphasizing empathy. And I know that's a sort of a bit of a mixed concept for some folks, but I think you really can't get a lot of things off the ground without a sense of the well-being of others and the needs and concerns of others that isn't purely sort of Spockian
Yeah,
style
empathy
logic.
seems to be something that's lacking nowadays, and that's really something that I've noticed and I've really been concerned about. I know empathy is something I try to work towards. I mean, obviously, I'm not always successful, but I think a focus on empathy is important. Is it important? I mean, I guess it is important to kind of understanding more of ethics. Is that a good first step?
Yeah, I think it's essential to it. I think it's the foundation. It's and again, there's the evolutionary concern where empathy is an evolved mechanism, and so we can be skeptical of our empathy, and sometimes our empathy fails us because it hasn't been properly calibrated. But I still think that the ability to care about and vividly understand the well-being of others is an irreplaceable part of understanding ethics, and that ethics is an irreplaceable part of leading a good life, leading a life of flourishing. And that I think folks who sort of dismiss this stuff as being too feely and not rational enough do so at their own personal peril in terms of the unfortunate consequences. Not everyone will have unfortunate consequences. Some people can, look at our president, right? Some people can get through life being nothing but immoral and still get a variety of what some would consider positive outcomes. But I don't think it's a good life. And I think, you wouldn't, a reasonable person, again, we'll go back to rationality, right? A reasonable person wouldn't trade that kind of life for a life that involves the kind of vagaries that I think empathy necessarily introduce into our
So let's
our
say
world.
I'm somebody who feels like their ethical world is lacking a bit. What would be something this person or anybody could do to kind of, I don't know, exercise their ethical muscles and try to like make themselves better in that sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think putting it in terms of ethical muscles is the right way to put it. There's a theory within ethics called virtue theory that is very old, goes back to the Greeks, and the idea is basically ethics is like muscles. You can't just learn your way into having muscles, and you can't just learn your way into having ethics either. You have to habituate yourself into it. You have to practice it in your life. So I think it should be a two-pronged process, right? Part of it is learning about the theories, and there's lots of good resources for which you can start to dive into theories. And there's no shame in this kind of thing with diving into whatever level of theoretical analysis you're interested in. So if you want to read primary texts, you can go and read John Stuart Mill and Kant and Aristotle and read these folks directly, and that can be an interesting challenge. But if you'd rather just go to the Wikipedia article about ethics and start learning about different theories, that's a great way to dive down a bunch of, crazy rabbit holes. So part of it, I think, is just starting to explore all of the ethical questions, all of the different trade-offs, for which the internet is, the modern Library of Alexandria, and can help you out. You can check out my podcast. There's lots of other good podcasts out there, like Explaining Ethics, that go through a lot of these major theories. And then on the other side, the practice part is doing the thing where you go around in your life as you're engaging with others, as you're doing activities, and think, are there ways that this could be done more ethically that I'm not necessarily thinking about? Or do I feel like I'm undercutting my flourishing in some kind of way here by engaging in this particular way or not engaging in this particular way? And then try to nudge yourself towards more ethical behavior, right? And the more you get in the habit of doing that, hopefully the more you can do it in large scale situations as well, very momentous cases. So there's no like easy silver bullet or anything. There's no get ethics quick scheme. It's really a lifelong process of learning and weighing of challenges and hopefully doing the right thing and then accepting sometimes when you do the wrong thing and trying to make amends for it. And that's life, right? That's
So
life
what
is
if you
growth.
see somebody that you care about kind of going down the wrong way ethically, as they would put it? Is there anything you could do, or does that just seem kind of, that's one of those things where you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink? I mean, is there would it be would you be interfering with their personal growth by even getting involved with it?
Oh, I don't. I think you should definitely get involved sometimes. I mean, like if it'll be functional. It depends. There's a lot of complexities to the like when you should and shouldn't get involved kind of question. But you know, setting aside those complexities, I think not only um, can you, but you ought to try to engage yourself with others in such a way that you encourage them to become more ethical as well. Um, will you be successful is, you know, good luck. It's hard. And it's hard in the same way that persuasion of any sort is always hard, right? Like we could talk about ethical conversion the same way we could talk about, deconverting people from any other set of beliefs or tribe or something like that. It's very difficult to get people to change their beliefs, especially when the changing of those beliefs would come with massive changes to their lifestyle, potentially, would come with massive existential crisis, potentially. So it can be hard. In those situations, though, you know, the things that I find that have worked some, and I don't have a perfect success record any more than anyone else does, but like what I found works is you do have to like build up a relationship with that person, or if you're lucky, already have a relationship established with that person sufficient that you can effectively lean on them. Like begin with persuasion, right? Make your case and that sort of thing. But if that isn't sufficient, then your options are, a short, sharp shock in terms of saying, this is unacceptable. I need you to not do this thing, or we can't be on the same page anymore. We can't be friends anymore, or something like that, or I won't support you in this particular choice. That we're pro-social creatures, and so nudging people socially is probably the best option that you have. Obviously, we should make laws and things to try to restrict severely immoral behavior, but when it comes to like, people who are close to you who like, I don't know, are trending conservative or something like that, and you think that that's particularly immoral, you can present to them, look, here's the evidence of the people who are suffering as a result of this particular behavior, right? If you're lucky, they're not sociopaths. And so when you put that suffering in front of them, that will sway some of them, right? And if you can't sway them with empathy and you can't sway them with consistency of saying, well, look, you wouldn't want to be treated this way, so why would you allow for anyone else to be treated this way? If you can't get them with either of those things, then you're left with force on some form or another, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you're not speaking of fucking, punching him necessarily or whatever. Just some kind of like, if you want to be friends with me, then you have to do this or whatever. Or if you're going to go out and murder people, obviously, we're going to have to, do some sort of, keep you from doing that, right? Obviously, that's the extreme example.
Yeah, and it's it's a really relevant question right now, I think, as we're watching a lot of people become radicalized towards ethically dubious positions. I don't have a good solution for it. Like, I think we're facing a massive cultural crisis that is going to continue to worsen because, just like there's no easy way to pull someone out of a truly isolationist cult, there's no way to pull someone out of an isolationist, immoral political view that has become such a crucial part of their personal identity. And I'm not saying we can deal with these individuals by force. Obviously, that's not a functional solution. But the reality is there is no functional solution, right? Like the non-force options are not functional. They're just all we have when we take violence off the table, as we probably
Well,
should.
that brings about another interesting question. There seems to be some proponents of some sort of violence on the left. Of course, I consider myself a leftist, but there does seem to be this sort of clash between the I guess the more I don't know if violence the right word, but I guess it is more confrontational forces like Antifa, for example, and those who would say no, violence is not the answer. We need to take more like peaceful yet if forceful means to achieve that end. So what do you think about that?
I think, the paradox of tolerance remains unresolved. There's Karl Popper sort of evoked this very challenging problem that democratic societies face, where tolerant liberal societies, by allowing the freedom of speech, allow for speech that is itself intolerant. Speech where the end goal of that speech is to bring about the cessation of free speech through oppression of various groups or individuals or changes to the system. And so the question becomes, when is the danger to democracy or society sufficient that one should turn to violence, or one is required to turn to violence in terms of addressing social injustice or addressing particular immoral groups. And there isn't a perfect answer to the question. That's why it's a paradox, right? Like, the problem is there's no easy way to say when someone is such a substantial risk and their view is so ethically extreme that we have to meet it with force. And then there's a separate practical question of, like, does meeting it with force at this particular point in time make the problem worse, which I think it does. But that doesn't mean there isn't a point in time in which force doesn't become necessary, right? It was necessary to defeat the original Nazis by force. So, I think ethics has to make room for the just use of force in certain circumstances. And then, like, you can get into lots of other complicated issues about, like, does Antifa use force proactively or does it use it defensively, right? Does it use it to protect people, or is it using it in inappropriate ways? And, like, in some cases, I think it is using it in inappropriate ways, and, like, that should be criticized. But I think that we have to be really careful that we don't construct or lean into the false narrative that people like Trump want to put forward, which says, folks on both sides are resorting to extremism and force, where there's a very disproportionate authoritarianism slant to the left-right divide at this point. Like, I know it's been the right's talking point that, like, the lefties are just as fascist as the righties, but it's just fucking nonsense. Like, and we have to continue to be careful about calling it nonsense and not slipping into, oh, well, yeah, maybe we do need to think about the use of force in this. Like, I don't think we're at that place. And if we do see an escalation in force, I still think it's likely to be from militia groups who have been training to use force, rather than from sort of lefty extremist groups for the most part. I think. I could be wrong.
I'm pretty sure we're both on the left side of the spectrum. I mean, I think it's safe to assume that. So that's this conundrum I've kind of been thinking about, because at what point is a violence of some sort or force? Where is the tipping point? Where is the kind of, where do we start having to engage in that sort of thing? I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, and I don't think that there is an easy answer, and I think we hope that we don't get to the point where we have to answer that question. I don't think we're there yet. But I think if we're going to avoid getting there, we do need to be talking about ethics more seriously and less like a game, the way that we sometimes do about politics, where it's all entertainment and horse racing and stuff like that, and so much less about, these are real important life and death situations, and, like, we need to take this very, very seriously, because if we don't get ethical with regard to climate change soon, we're not going to be here, right? Or there's going to be massive suffering that comes about as a result. So, yeah, I think we need to be taking this stuff a lot more seriously than we are. And I think some people are taking it, let me put it this way. it's not that people aren't taking ethics seriously right now. It's that we have a very polarized, divided culture about what the ethical thing to do is. The right really genuinely believes that in supporting Trump, they are doing the ultimately ethical thing. And the left really thoroughly believes that in supporting not Trump, they are doing the more ethical thing. And I personally think one side is more right than the other is, but I don't think it's that like the right has abandoned ethics. I think it's that the right has made the kind of calculation that a lot of people do from time to time where the ends justify the means.
Yeah, what the fuck is the ends though? That's the problem.
The ends is rolling back abortion, which to them is baby murder. Like the ends is rolling back the things that are harming our society, these social progress that has been in their view detrimental to our society. So yeah, I think those are the ends are, if we're being honest, preserving a white majority. But they view that as an ethical imperative. So like this is part of the difficulty, is that everyone thinks that they are doing the ethical thing. And, I think some people are more right than others, but there's no way to build a machine to prove that. And arguments only go so far. And that's the world we live in.
What do we do? What can an individual do to kind of use ethics to their advantage in this kind of what seems to be chaotic time in our history?
Yeah, it's hard because, I think we still have moral obligations as individuals to do the right thing, even in a system that is failing to do the right thing, that is run by individuals who are often failing to do the right thing. What we are morally obligated to do depends to some extent on your own individual situation. There's no thing that everyone has to be doing the exact same way. It depends on what you are capable of, what skills you have, what economic stability you have that can allow you to engage in more ethical behavior. Maybe you're already doing a lot of ethical behavior. I think right now a lot of work has to go towards maintaining basic levels of psychological and moral stability, just sort of preserving any kind of progress that we have made as a society that is being eroded in the present tense, in the hopes that we can get back on a functional track again soon. So, I don't think you can totally abandon your obligations to others, but I do think it's important that individuals temper what a very understandably strong felt urge to get out there and do things with recognizing that some of what they need to be doing is making sure that they're okay while dealing with the trauma of watching a country sort of polarize and watching parts of that country demonize other parts in ways that lead to the risk of substantial instability. And like the gaslighting, the amount of gaslighting that's been going on in the past 2 years is really damaging to people, I think. And I don't think folks are always necessarily aware of the harms that are being caused. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done sort of just taking care of yourself and others around you. And then beyond that, it's advocating for putting people in place that can make substantial systemic change. Because a lot of these problems can't be solved by individuals just doing the right thing more. They need to be solved by radical overhauls to systems that sort of perpetuate the problem.
Well, I think on some level, people like, I don't know, me and some others who try to do the right thing and talk a lot of game on Facebook, but actually kind of do want to like go out and, I don't know, go out and just do something. It's this idea of just like you're sitting around and you feel like you should be doing something, but you don't know what to do, and it's kind of overwhelming, and it's like, and you feel it's this guilt that you're not doing enough, I guess, to further the cause or whatever.
Yeah, and that's where I think we need to be careful and not get sucked up into this kind of moral sainthood obsession where we're feeling like we need to be out there doing something every moment of every day. It's hard because we're also naturally inclined to let ourselves not do more than we feel like doing. So like it's a balancing act, and I think the answer is try to do a little bit more and then let yourself have some, personal time as well. Like it's that's why I say again, there's no easy formulas for ethics. It's a lifelong balancing act.
Well, I definitely think that ethics is, if any time, well, at least in my lifetime, is ethics is something that needs to be really paid attention to, then I think it's probably this is when you start need to really kind of concentrate on that, especially for yourself.
Yeah, and it's hard because if you haven't been doing it, it's hard to get into the habit later. So I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying like it would be better if we were getting people thinking in these directions earlier in their lives. On the other hand, like you are built for it in a sense. You have the empathy, you have the reasoning capabilities at your disposal to do it. It's just I think maybe we need to think more about it being its own conscious practice and not just something that naturally comes along with doing all the other things.
So yeah, it seems like ethics is something that, like you said, it just isn't there. I mean, the capability is there, and like I said earlier, it's just something you really have to kind of practice doing on a regular basis in order to kind of keep it, your wits, I don't know, sharp, I guess, about it, and kind of, like I say, exercising that muscle and make sure that when you need it, it's there at the ready.
Yeah, and that when it's there in a sense often reflexively. That like you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do at that moment. And it's not a process of like deliberation and something necessarily. It's just that's the thing that one ought to do, and you're habituated to do that, so you do the thing. I think that's important in a sense.
Yeah, well, as I said, I feel like at this point in time, with everything that's going on, I don't even know what to say. It's just so much shit, man. That that's definitely that needs to be something that's in our toolbox, and along with everything else. And I think, like you said, it's just we have to fucking just keep at it and make sure that even in the face of so many other things, and just keep that as a base level and on top of everything else.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully, I think the ultimate goal is not to. I mean, like you need to like. It's funny because I just said, you got to think about this stuff as a separate thing. I think it's a situation where first you see it as a separate thing, and then after a good amount of practice, you stop seeing it as a separate thing again, right? Like it becomes an integral part of everything you're doing. Similar, like in the field of AI, for example, right? For a time, people didn't care about the ethics of the AIs that were being generated and or how they were being generated, and like that was a huge problem. And you got Facebook and you get move fast and break stuff, disrupt style technology. And then you get a period where everyone's talking about ethical AI. And the idea is, everyone hires an ethicist to be on staff to talk with the people about like, what are the ethical implications of this program, of implementing this app, of this new technology, etc. And then the ultimate goal, hopefully, is there stops being a distinction between AI and ethical AI, and you just go back to thinking about it as AI, but with that ethical factor integrated into it. And I think the same can be true for our day-to-day lives, that like you do the right things and they feel good, and you just go about doing them because they feel good, and you don't necessarily have to be thinking about it as I'm doing the right thing because it's the right thing in that kind of way, if you have been habituated into being an ethical person.
Well, as we kind of wrap it up here, what is kind of the last word you would say about ethics and kind of its importance in our everyday lives?
I would say it's very important, but I don't want it to be seen as unapproachable. That like it's something that we're all in a position to do, and we need to be doing it, and it's okay to just sort of take small steps towards that. To start doing some reading, to start seeing if there are like one small thing you can change a week that makes your behavior more ethical. I think that like it's sort of like weight loss, where like when people start thinking about it, they feel like they have to like cut out everything and start exercising 6 days a week all of a sudden. Like it's an all or nothing kind of thing. But I think, at the end of the day, my hope is that people just act a little bit more ethically, and that as that gets easier for them, they add a little bit more and they add a little bit more and they encourage a few more people to do the same. And, they take a few more risks in order to push that kind of stuff. And, it's probably not going to be enough to save us from climate change, and we're still probably all doomed, but I don't really have an alternative at the moment. So I guess that's my final thought.
It's funny you should say that, because I'm like, oh, we're all going to die anyway, but maybe it's just still be nice to people if you can. If you can, just why the fuck not, just for the hell of it. Let's give it a shot.
It's hard, man. I can talk about right actions in specific cases. I can talk about a lot of different theories, but a lot of it feels hard to give prescriptions in the face of overwhelming, massive problems that we're aware of, and that a lot of far larger actors than anyone who's listening to this show are not substantially impacting. So,
well, on that positive note, we'll leave it there. But Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on for the third fucking time.
We finally got there.
Yeah, and even though it's still fucked up, I was determined to make this work, because I really did want to have you on, because you have a lot of great things to say, and you're very, like, you're a teacher, so you're good at expressing these things, and I think I have more of an appreciation now than I did, and I'm not just saying that. I'm going to do a little more reading. I might have to start with Wikipedia, and maybe work myself way up or something.
Yeah, I don't think there's any shame in starting with Wikipedia. Like, I'll tell my students, it shouldn't be your final resource usually, but it's nothing wrong with it being your first resource. Like, it's a good jumping off point. So yeah, I think I'm glad to hear it, and I will continue to try to nudge the ball down the field what little bit I can before it all burns.
It seems like you're doing a pretty good job, as for what I can hear. So,
well, thanks, and thanks for having me on.
Hey, no problem. Take care. That'll do it for this episode of the Podunk Polymath Podcast. You can find this show website at thepodunkpolymath.com. You can download this show from the page or on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, or from your favorite podcatcher. I'm also on Twitter at Podunk Polymath, on Facebook at facebook.com/thepodunkpolymath, and on YouTube at youtube.com/thepodunkpolymath. You can also join the official Facebook group for the show at facebook.com/groups/the Podunk Posse. All those words are separated by periods. If you'd like to contact me, you can email me at podunkpolymath@gmail.com, or you can leave a voicemail at 615-378-POPO-7676. The more bizarre, the better. If you would like to support the show, become a member of the Patreon Posse. Go to patreon.com/thepodunkpolymath, and for as little as $1, you can become a patron and make me feel like this whole endeavor wasn't a big waste of time. And plus, you can also stroke my ego. You can also make a one-time donation to the show via PayPal at paypal.me/podunkchris. I want to thank everyone who listens to the show. I really do appreciate it. Until next time, y'all take it easy now, okay?